Today's lecture is on Germaine Greer's The Female Eunuch, and as you know, we've been running this series of literary theory feminist texts, and Germaine Greer stands in the middle of the 20th century. She makes a straight line from the feminism that started in the late 18th century, and it became activist in the early 20th century. It also started talking of social propagation of ideas and activism at the level of legality, at the level of politics. And when it came to the second version of feminism that appeared in the 1930s, 40s, she is a pillar of that particular phase, and she combines the earlier activism with the later depth of knowledge and understanding. So what we might say about this particular title of the book that I'm picking up today, and which will finally help us understand the centrality of the concern that she reflects in her writing, we'll see that she has used this term, the female eunuch, with a particular purpose. What is that purpose, you might be wondering, and why is that woman is not being talked about, the female, not as a person but as a eunuch? What does it mean? All of you would be wondering. I too wondered in the beginning when I saw this book. And it's a big book, and I'm just taking up only one aspect of it for the lecture today. I found that the woman is denied all the rights that society might give her equal to the males, but because society is led by, controlled by, and conducted by the male community, therefore the female person comes through the eyes and the gaze of the male. So the male domination in the society of 19th century, earlier centuries, and the 20th century has ensured that the woman does not come out from the female. So the female is the body, and then the body is defined, is in fact constructed ideologically by the male community, and therefore since she is denied the bodily features, therefore the writer has called the modern woman as well as the earlier women eunuchs, that they are not human beings, that they don't have a gender, that they are more at the level of the bodies, which are in today's terms commodities. So where is the sexuality? Where is the particular aspect of the human behavior, human desires, human aspirations, human ideals? Since that is all denied to the woman, therefore this writer has preferred calling the female community as the community of eunuchs. So it's a very provocative phrase. It's a phrase that sets us thinking, and that is the purpose of her writing. That's the purpose of her active life that she led. So I thought that I should first explain to you the meaning of the title of the book, and from where I'll take up certain ideas for projection today. Let's for a minute look at where she came from and her identity, because we are discussing generally texts, so we would not focus upon the identity or the overall person that we are discussing, but only the text. Therefore, I'll be brief regarding that. Germaine Greer, born in 1939 in Melbourne, Australia. So she is not from Europe, she is from Australia. Later on, of course, she shifted to England, and from there she became active. But then her bringing up was in Australia. She is around, she is in fact kicking, she is able to make a dent in the social thought in our own time, and she is our contemporary exactly. So she was born in a Catholic family to begin with. Catholic family itself puts her in a position of defense, because particularly England and generally Europe also is visited by Protestantism, which started sometime in the 16th century onwards. And then, it is now a common knowledge that Catholics remain in the background, and the Protestants think Catholics merely live, merely protect their faith, and the thinking part is not done by the Catholic community. That's the general thing. Of course, there are a large number of intellectuals that the Catholic community has produced. So I'll not go into that. So she comes from a Catholic family, and then, she revolts against the ideas of Catholicism, because Catholicism keeps her bound to a particular communal thought, a particular community thought, and that she is not allowed. In fact, she is prevented from entering the world of freedom. Catholicism means a kind of code of conduct, a kind of humility of the individual, following certain established principles of life. And therefore, if somebody is a Catholic, then one generally goes by what the world believes and thinks. So she comes from the Catholic family, and anybody who is creative, who is productive intellectually, one who has the tendency to think, would like to move out of, if not actually revolt against the Catholic beliefs. Protestantism doesn't have that problem, because the Protestants generally think. They might think wrongly, they might go the wrong way, but then at least think. But Catholics believe in some kind of wisdom, not thinking, not ideology, not any intellectual activism, but wisdom. So maybe that wisdom came from her, but then she did not believe in preserving that wisdom, and she wanted that she should read more, think more, provoke people more, and assert herself not as a Catholic individual, but as a free woman. So that freedom actually is expressed in the book that we will be taking up for discussion today. Her education. She did her PhD thesis under the title The Ethic of Love and Marriage in Shakespeare's Early Comedies, and that was published in 1968. I particularly mention this fact because then she moves closer to us. Most of us are students and scholars of literature, and we generally look at the world around us from the point of view of writers, and here we have a thinker in feminism who herself is a scholar of literature, and in fact her PhD is on Shakespeare. And just cast a glance at the title, The Ethic of Love and Marriage. Now the three things, the two things do not generally agree. Love does not follow any ethics, marriage does. And maybe Shakespeare is involved in his own time in the late 16th, early 17th century, and she's talking about the early comedies, which means she's talking about the close of the 16th century. At that point of time, the question of ethic was actually confronted by the question of love. So if you fall in love, then you assert yourself against the traditions of the family from where you come. You also carry along with you the woman as a male, the woman who also comes from an established family, and the two fall in love with each other, which means that they are flouting the social code, they are flouting the moral code, and that brings in the question of ethics. So you can see that her study is also entrenched in the very dilemma that we face if we confront love in our life. The Female Eunuch was published in 1970 when this person would be let's say 31 years old, so a young woman, and she is very critical of the world in which she lives, and she writes this famous book. She has written a large number of other books also, but then she is famous for this particular book that she wrote at the age of 31 in 1970. And it has gone into many reprints. It has become a very popular book. It's a kind of a book that has assumed the prominence of a classic, and that's why we thought that we will talk about this book today. One more thing, that 1970 puts her immediately after Simone de Beauvoir, the author on whom we have already organized a lecture. And she was Simone de Beauvoir, the French woman, the French woman theorist and a proponent of freedom and equality. She talked about certain points which in the Female Eunuch this person actually takes further. And therefore we say that female eunuch has a direct link with the second sex, the book that was written by Simone de Beauvoir. So that will take us ideas into the domain of literature, into the domain of ideology, into the name of politics, and let's see how that happens. The title of the book suggests that the woman's bodily self. Now I explain the idea. Woman has a bodily self. Her domain of desire, her ideals and aspirations as a woman are repressed in a male-dominated society. As a result of this, she ceases to be a woman. This is interpreted as the woman being a eunuch. Ceasing to be a woman. So one is a woman, one is born a woman, but then one is not allowed to exist as a woman in society, and says this writer that she is reduced to the level of a eunuch. So this point is already explained to you. It is clear to you that unless the woman has come out of herself to tell people that she has some kind of independence and freedom to think about the world in which she lives, therefore, till that time, the relevance of this particular book will remain. As a text, the female eunuch is a bold statement about the way the woman is understood in society. I call it bold because not many people would like being told, that the woman does not exist as a dignified person. There might be examples in society where sensitive males live, and they have already taken the idea, at least to the higher circle of society, where a woman is supposed to be, or at least views as equal to men, equal to the male, but the society generally, and society that doesn't mean merely the upper sections. Society means not merely the educated ones, but also those who live in a state of poverty and abject repression, rendering them abject in social behavior. So this phenomena is old enough to cover the whole human history. So this is the point that I particularly would let you request you to think about, that human history is marked by a distinct kind of division between the males and the females, and the males dominate and women are obedient, and in fact they work as slaves, and therefore this book actually opens our eyes from that point of view, that never in history, human history, have women been allowed to come out into the open to think for themselves and for the whole world, and tell people that they also have a point of view and a way of living. The book has a mode of openness. The way you read this book, it's a very good read. It's very interesting to go through, and it has a mode of openness, freedom, aggression, and assertion. These are all important words. Please keep them in mind. Aggression, because unless there is aggression, people will not open their eyes. They will merely pass by and say, okay, this is one of the phenomena, and why should we bother about it? But when we see an aggressive person talking about the cause of women's freedom, then of course people look up and see. It is not criticism for criticism's sake, but shows light at the end of the tunnel. This is also something that we have to keep in mind, that she is not criticizing because she likes to criticize. She is not deriving any pleasure out of criticism. She doesn't want to draw attention of the people towards herself as a thinker, as an intellectual. That's not her job. That's not her ideal. What she wants to do is that this world, which is so bad that it deserves all the criticism that is given to it, that is offered to it by an intellectual, but also that there is a way out. There are answers to the problems that society has, and those answers have to be thought about. But then there certainly exist answers. Where do they exist? Maybe not in ideology, maybe not in the current politics, in the current social formation and code of behavior. But then, since women would wake up, and there will be a large number of men also who will finally join the community of thinkers. So they will say that it is possible for the society to actually become better than what it is today. Now, this is an important idea. Viewers, you think about it yourself. Whether you are living in a society which is fated to become worse day by day, or you live in a society, I live in a society that has the light at the end of the tunnel. So this question we face every day. Most of us become pessimists by what we see in the world, because we've been seeing from different angles, and we've been realizing that the world is not as good as it was today. Romantics in the 19th century said so, and they became pessimists. So do we become pessimists? Do our women today become pessimists, or should they say, no, there is a way out, and one has to find that way out, but then one has to persist with the idea that optimism is the answer, pessimism is not the answer. Indeed, the perspective of the book is freedom that the female needs and is to fight for. Fighting is important. You need, but you may not fight. You might put up with whatever you are offered. But there are people who would say, no, let's first understand the alternative path, and when that is made clear to us, then we should tell people that we would like to bring that path into our life. And if there is a clash, then let there be that clash, and let men also face some kind of a challenge, some kind of a revolt against a whole community of women, because they are fighting actually not against men, but they are fighting for their own freedom. So this is the question that one has to keep in mind. So it's an optimistic book. It's not a pessimistic book. It's not a romantic book. It's a book that is very real. It's a book that shows us the way. It's a book that inspires us to think. Let us focus here specifically on the section titled The Middle Class Myth of Love and Marriage. Now, this is a long chapter in the book, and I'll be mainly focusing upon this chapter and see how well the chapter's title is worded. The Middle Class Myth of Love. It means that the middle class, of course, is aware of love. The middle class projects love for itself. You can see that happening in the 19th century English literature, that a large number of novels talk about the male-female sense of a relationship of love. But then most of these people are the middle class people, and they do not create a world of love. They do not create a culture of love. They create only a myth of love. And why? You can think about this. Why is it that the middle class creates a myth of love and not actual conditions in which love can prosper? I as a teacher can think into this question. Think about this question. You as students and scholars and curious listeners can all think about love and the myth of love. Myth means it's not real. Myth means it's illusion. Myth means we have actually created something after our own heart without realizing what the nature of love is. And we do so because as middle class people, we are tied hand and foot. We don't have the freedom to think freely. We can think only about that thing which is told to us by the established authority in our midst. After all, we live in the middle of the upper class and the lower class, and we take our guidance mainly from the upper class, and we have to implement that idea of the upper class into our own lives, as well as for the benefit of we call it a benefit, for the benefit of the lower people. So middle class has this very strange kind of a role to play in society, and the writer is aware that love in the case of the middle class is only a myth. And marriage, okay, love can be seen as myth, but how is marriage a myth? This is a difficult question to answer, but then this question is to be raised. Marriage doesn't mean only for the woman; it also means for the man. So, and the man interprets, and the woman is placed in the situation of marriage. So, in that relationship, both are involved, man and woman. They fall in love sometimes, and then they marry, and this marriage then assumes mythical proportions. So you have to think about this idea. Why this person, writer of female Eunuch, Germaine Greer, why does she call even marriage a myth? Now, straight away I can think of marriages being happy marriages, but how are they happy? What does a happy marriage mean? A happy marriage should mean, in the modern context, in the context of the middle class, that the woman is good looking, that the woman is well behaved, that she projects culture very well, she is obedient, she greets the visitors and the guests well, she is a fine host, and then it's called a happy marriage. So if the husband and wife are shown as smiling to each other and laughing, then we think it's a happy marriage. But that happy marriage is at the cost of the woman's freedom, because she has to obey directly or indirectly the diktats of the males. So this question is raised in this chapter, and this is elaborated also. And what I particularly like in this lecture is, in this section of the book, is that examples are taken from literature. In fact, this is another question that we can consider in the context of feminism, that feminism is first taken up as an issue by literature, by writers of literature. But when they do so, then mostly they obey the dictates and commands of the males. And that is what is happening here. So in the 19th century, there are examples. She will be in fact taking up certain ideas and certain quotations from literature to elaborate her point on the myth of love and marriage for the middle class. So it records the rise of the most commonly accepted mutual fantasy of heterosexual love. Fantasy of heterosexual love between a man and a woman. Heterosexual and homosexual. Homosexual means that one loves one's own gender, and heterosexual is that the man loves the woman and the woman loves the man. And this heterosexual love is actually subject of a matter of fantasy. Fantasy means that you fantasize about it, you create your own particular situation in the mind about the society where you live and where you conduct yourself as a husband or a wife. And that fantasy of love, which, for instance, there is a kind of courtship in the marriages in the 19th century England and Europe, and that courtship means that for some time the boy and the girl, the man and the woman, would be allowed to spend time together and would try to understand each other, and if they like each other mutually, then they would they will be in a state of love, and they will have that kind of bliss. And many poems and novels are written about it, and they are quite popular. And finally, marriage occurs. And when marriage occurs, then the same lover who earlier, was giving all praise and appreciation to the woman, this person becomes the guide and the master in the family. So, but the fantasy continues. The fantasy is that the master is kind and loving, and that the woman is sweet, pleasant, and that she is obedient. So if that is the fantasy on which the marriage institution and the idea of love exists, then this writer would say that it's a middle class thing, that it doesn't actually exist. It's the creation of one's mind, and that the woman pretends to be happy. Actually, her happiness is defined not by herself as a person, who is equal in marriage with other members of the family, including the husband. Therefore, it will remain a fantasy. So this is exactly what the writers think who deal with this question. And the good part about this particular text, this particular section of the book, is that the examples are taken from the popular fiction. Popular fiction actually reflects the moods and the positions of the common masses. And for the market also, popularity means more money for the publisher, more money for the seller of literature as a good, and the kind of thing that sells well, that in fact is offered in literature through writing, and there these fantasies are sold. These particular myths are sold, and the more popular the myth and the fantasy, the better for the producer. Producer means the publisher, and better for the society which enjoys itself. So just see that this idea has been established as an idea of myth and fantasy, and that is what is very critical of the actual state of affairs in society. Thank you.